At the beginning of the drama, Jixia is stopped by her cousin, Bu Fan, who informs her that she has an important client to meet today, someone she needs to convince to invest in their company. However, Jixia refuses, stating that she dislikes meetings. A short while later, her uncle, Bu Fan's father, arrives and asks her to meet the client, but she tells him she has an important shopping appointment and needs to leave. As she heads toward the garage, Jixia can't believe her eyes when she spots the man in the car next to hers. Memories of her ex-boyfriend, Z, flood her mind. They had a wonderful relationship until one morning, she woke up to find him completely gone, leaving nothing behind except a handful of cash on the table. Since that day, Jixia has tried to move on by burying herself in work and shopping. She snaps out of her thoughts as she watches him with another woman. Without hesitation, she follows them to a hotel, confirms his name, and is shocked to realize that he is the very same client Bu Fan had mentioned. Furious, Jixia decides to follow the woman accompanying him. Inside the hotel room, she is stunned to learn that the woman is actually Ziyi's attorney, Aishin. Just then, Ziyi steps out of the bathroom, his gaze filled with disdain as he looks at Jixia. Without a word, he walks past her as if she were a stranger. Hurt by his coldness, Jixia struggles to find her voice, but before she can say anything, her uncle enters the room. Apologizing to Ziyi, he introduces Jixia as his niece and informs him that she will be the one managing his business dealings with the company. But Ziyi makes it clear that he didn't come to the company to do business with them. He came to file a lawsuit against them for stealing designs from his company without permission. Jixia's uncle speaks to her and Bu Fan, telling them that this is a disaster and that they must resolve the issue without causing any trouble. As Jixia wonders how to find a solution without having to deal directly with Ziyi, Bu Fan enters the room a few moments later. After reviewing the client's name, he realizes that Ziyi is the same jerk who disappeared from Jixia's life without warning. He tells her that he's willing to handle the negotiations in her place if she can't separate her work from her emotions. As Bu Fan speaks, Jixia's mind drifts back to the first time she met Ziyi. He had rented out an entire cinema hall just to watch a movie alone. By chance, Jixia had entered the hall by mistake. Instead of leaving, she sat beside him in the front row to watch the film. When Ziyi looked at her, he was immediately intrigued. Not only did he decide to watch the movie with her, but he also played her favorite music for her. After the movie, Ziyi invited Jixia to dinner, and the two spent hours discussing films and music, sharing their favorite choices with each other. Jixia snapped out of her thoughts, and without warning, she abruptly kicked Bu Fan out of the room. The moment he was gone, she broke down in deep sobs. Bu Fan, standing outside, could hear her and felt terrible for her pain, but he knew there was nothing he could do. He had seen this before. Whenever Ziyi's name was mentioned, Jixia would cry until exhaustion put her to sleep. Meanwhile, Aishin walked into his office and informed him that Jixia had agreed to pay the compensation. However, she reminded him that legally he now had full control over the hotel. She then asked if he intended to keep it or demolish it like he had done before. At that moment, the truth is revealed. 1 year ago, Ziyi had taken over an orphanage. Everyone had believed he would turn it into a paradise for the children. But the moment he signed the contract, they were shocked to discover that he had implemented harsh and terrible changes instead. It becomes clear that Ziyi intends to take control of the hotel only to demolish it completely. Later, Ziyi meets with his advisor and asks for information about the hotel's owners. When the advisor mentions Jixia, he describes her as a girl struggling with depression, still clinging to the memories of a lover who abandoned her a year ago. After the advisor leaves, Ziyi glances around and is startled to find Jixia in the same place, drinking and crying. He notices someone secretly slipping a sedative into her drink. Concerned, he watches her closely but feels relieved when, in her drunken state, she carelessly throws the drink away. However, as Ziyi steps into the bathroom, he overhears the man who drugged her making a bet with his friend, confident that by the end of the night, he'll have her no matter what. As the two men approached Jixia and handed her another drink, Ziyi suddenly appeared, pulling her into his arms and declaring, "Stay away from my girlfriend." Without hesitation, he took the glass and drank it himself. Moments later, the effects of the sedative began to take hold, but despite his weakening state, Ziyi did everything he could to keep them from getting close to Jixia. He managed to keep the men away, and carried her back to the hotel. But then, immediately passed out beside her. But after a few minutes of rest, she woke up and mumbled in a dazed voice that she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Ziyi was right beside her. She must really be drunk. But as her vision cleared and she realized he was truly there, she curled up at the edge of the bed, her voice trembling as she asked what had happened. When the memories of the night came rushing back, a wave of gratitude washed over her, he had saved her. Her eyes fell on his injured hand, and a pang of sympathy struck her. Without hesitation, she decided to clean and treat his wound. Jixia, however, went a little overboard. She used an excessive amount of gauze and cotton while treating Ziyi's wound. Once she was done, she went to wash her hands, but when she returned, she found Ziyi feeling hot and insistently trying to take off his shirt. She tried to stop him, telling him to cut it out, but he ignored her and moved closer, as if he was about to kiss her. Just as their faces almost touched, he suddenly passed out, right on her arm. Unable to move him, she had no choice but to sleep like that. The next morning, Ziyi woke up to find Jixia nestled in his arms. The memories of the night before flooded his mind, and in an instant he pulled away and got up in a rush to leave. Still shaken, Ziyi arrived at work only to realize that his employees were whispering among themselves, gossiping about how, for the first time in his life, he was late to the office. Ziyi yells at his employees, ordering them to focus on their work, but deep down he's distracted. Ever since he woke up next to Jixia, he hasn't been able to get her out of his mind. Meanwhile, Jixia wakes up to find that Ziyi has left her a credit card. The sight of it instantly triggers an old wound. Memories of the time he left money for her before disappearing. Humiliation washes over her once again. But this time, she doesn't stay silent. She calls him, her voice sharp as she tells him that nothing happened between them for him to leave her money. Ziyi, unfazed, replies coldly, "If you think so highly of yourself, then come see your uncle. He's practically begging me to let him keep control of the hotel." Jixia rushed to the company and pushed her uncle away, assuring him not to worry, as she would solve this problem without him having to humiliate himself. However, he remained unconvinced and told her that Ziyi was a ruthless man with a bad reputation. He had even disappeared from the scene a year ago, and no one knew where he had been or what he had been doing during that time. His words sparked her curiosity, and she began to think seriously about the matter. Later, she met Bufan and brought up her concerns about Ziyi's sudden change, wondering where he had disappeared to all that time. Since he had been absent from everyone who knew him, it couldn't have been just about avoiding her. This led her to question the real reason behind his disappearance. Bufan considered two possibilities: either Ziyi had wanted to erase his past and start over, or he had lost his memory. Upon hearing this, Jixia immediately chose to believe the second option, convinced that he must have suffered from amnesia. However, that didn't mean she was willing to forgive him. She still felt the need to punish him for what he had done to her. Sensing her anger, Bufan assured her that he was ready to take revenge on Ziyi for her sake. He walked to his room and knocked on the door, intending to punch him before Aishin arrived. However, Bufan saw her first and froze in place, completely shocked. Memories flooded back as he realized she was the same girl he had confessed his love to in high school. Back then, she had rejected him simply because she was taller than him. Bufan didn't hesitate this time. He told her that he had grown taller than her now and that his feelings for her had never changed. Once again, he confessed his love, but his hopes were crushed when she looked at him in confusion and asked, "Who are you?" It didn't take him long to realize that she had completely forgotten about him. Disheartened, he returned to Jixia, feeling frustrated. The two of them drank together, sharing the same pain of being forgotten by the ones they had once loved. As the night went on and Jixia became completely intoxicated, she stormed into Ziyi's room, unleashing her anger on him. She lashed out, demanding to know how he dared to claim he had forgotten her after everything they had been through. The humiliation in his words cut deep, and she refused to let it go unanswered. But he simply stood in front of her, watching her drunken outrage in silence. He didn't react. Instead, he said with unsettling certainty that she must be imagining things, because he had no idea who she was. Jixia completely lost control and began hitting him relentlessly until he fell to the ground, injured. Without hesitation, he took her to the police station, intending to file a complaint against her. However, as soon as they arrived, Jixia broke down in tears in front of the officer, confessing that he had once been her lover but had abandoned her in a cruel way. She admitted that her actions were driven by a desperate need for revenge. The officer, unimpressed, found their situation trivial compared to more serious matters. He turned to Ziyi and urged him to let it go, reminding him that she was drunk and in a terrible state. After some consideration, Ziyi agreed, and the two of them were allowed to leave. However, as soon as they stepped outside, Jixia made a shocking realization: Ziyi had never been injured at all. He smirked at her, revealing that the entire incident had been nothing more than a demonstration. He wanted her to see exactly what he was capable of if he ever decided to take revenge on her. Without giving her a chance to respond, he coldly told her to stay out of his way and leave him alone. That night, after returning home and falling asleep, Z found himself dreaming of her again. In his dream, they were sitting together in a movie theater, watching a film. Later, they went out for dinner, and she playfully asked him to compose a song just for her. The memory felt so vivid, as if it had truly happened. He woke up abruptly, his heart pounding. Frustration and confusion consumed him. Why did she keep invading his dreams? Why did she haunt him every time he closed his eyes? Hoping to clear his mind, he headed to the company the next day, but his attempt at finding peace was short-lived. As soon as she walked into his office, his irritation resurfaced. However, instead of starting an argument, she simply thanked him for clearing all the company's debts, sparing her uncle from having to pay them. Z was taken aback. He had no idea what she was talking about. Before he could respond, his phone rang. It was Aishin, confirming that the entire amount had been paid, just as he had instructed. Shocked, he checked his messages and found proof that he had indeed given the order to settle the debt. But he had no recollection of ever doing so. Feeling lost and unsettled, he abruptly left Jixia behind and returned home. Desperate for answers, he accessed his security camera recordings, hoping to figure out when exactly he had made that decision. However, what he saw on the screen left him completely stunned. There, on the footage, he witnessed a side of himself he hadn't seen in a long time. His other personality had resurfaced. It was then revealed that Z had been suffering from dissociative identity disorder for a very long time. He had spent years switching between his original self and his second personality, the one who loved music and films. However, a year ago, he had undergone treatment and successfully suppressed his alter, believing he had finally been cured. Now, he couldn't understand why it had suddenly resurfaced. The truth became clear. Jixia's lost lover, the one who had disappeared without warning, was none other than Ziyi's second personality. When Ziyi had woken up that morning and found Jixia beside him, he hadn't recognized her as someone significant. He simply assumed she was a woman he had spent the night with and, without a second thought, left her money before walking away. As Z delved deeper into his memories, he was forced to confront the reality of his condition. He had lived with this disorder for so long that he had grown accustomed to it. He had accepted that there was another person inside him, someone who would take over when he was asleep. Unlike others who might fear such a situation, Ziyi had embraced it. He had even found a way to communicate with his other self through messages. However, everything changed the moment his alter met Xixia. It had been love at first sight, and instead of disappearing as usual, he had chosen to stay. He had started dating her, forming a relationship that Ziyi had no knowledge of. But when Ziyi, as the original personality, eventually regained control, he was furious. The alter had broken the unspoken rules they had always followed. He had overstepped his boundaries, stayed for too long, and, worst of all, made a promise to a woman. That was something Z could never allow. Z went to his psychiatrist and told him that he had agreed to undergo treatment solely to get rid of his second personality completely. The doctor was initially surprised, as he had always known that Z and his alter had a close bond. However, when Z admitted that his alter had fallen in love, the doctor immediately understood the urgency of the situation. He warned Yi that they needed to eliminate the alter before it could take full control of his body. The treatment process was long and demanding. That was the period during which Ziyi had completely disappeared, not just from Jixia's life but from everyone around him. Snapping out of his memories, Ziyi immediately called his doctor again and informed him that his second personality had returned. He suspected that it had something to do with the girl he had once dated, especially now that she was working closely with him. The doctor cautioned him to be extremely careful. If he wasn't, the alter might take over once again. Determined to regain control of the situation, Ziyi went to Jixia and made it clear that he hadn't paid off her company's debts out of generosity. He demanded that she repay the full amount, warning her that if she didn't, he would destroy the hotel completely. With no other choice, Jixia decided to sell her shares to an investor and use the money to settle the debt. However, when her uncle found out about her decision, he was furious. Overcome with anger, he took her to her father's grave and reprimanded her for what she had done. Her uncle looked at her with disappointment, telling her that he never expected his daughter to give up on the company so easily. Despite his words, Jixia secretly met with the investor and finalized the sale of her shares. However, she had included a special clause in the contract. Her uncle would remain in charge of managing the company. Unbeknownst to her, the investor she had sold her shares to was actually working under Ziyi's orders. Later, Jixia finally confessed to her uncle that she had sold her shares. His disappointment only deepened when she revealed her next decision. She was planning to leave China. She explained that she had suffered too much and endured countless wounds. If she left now, she could finally put the past behind her and live in peace. After hearing her reasoning, both her uncle and Bu Fan reluctantly accepted her decision. Determined to move on, Jixia packed up her belongings from the office, preparing to leave everything behind. As she was about to go, she picked up a photo of herself with Z and stared at it, lost in thought. Uncertain of what to do with it, she threw it into the trash. But as she turned to leave, her gaze lingered on the discarded photo, unable to tear herself away. After a long moment of hesitation, she reached down and took it back. On the other side, Z woke up to find himself inside his car, teetering on the edge of a cliff, moments away from falling. Panic surged through him as he struggled to comprehend how he had ended up there. Before disaster could strike, a police officer appeared just in time and pulled him to safety. Z had no recollection of what had happened the night before. That could only mean one thing. His second personality had taken control. The realization hit him like a thunderbolt. His alter had likely tried to end their existence, unable to bear the thought of Jixia leaving. For the first time, true fear settled into Z's heart. He could actually lose his life over a woman. That was something he could never allow. Determined to stop her, he immediately called Jixia, demanding to see her. But her response made his heart sink. She was already on the plane, ready to leave at any moment. Just as she thought she was leaving everything behind, a breathtaking sight unfolded before her. Countless balloons began to float around the plane, filling the sky in a mesmerizing display. Then, to her utter disbelief, Ziyi appeared. He stepped onto the plane, holding a ring in his hand. In front of everyone, he got down on one knee and proposed. Jixia was overwhelmed with happiness, unable to believe what was happening. But then, reality struck. Everything Jixia had imagined was just a fleeting illusion. Z was indeed standing in front of her, but instead of a ring, he was holding a stack of documents. Calmly, he told her that he had decided to restructure her debt into installments and that he would return the money he had taken. But in exchange, he asked her not to leave. After a moment of hesitation, Jixia ultimately decided to stay. She got into the car with Ziyi, leaving the airport behind. Back at the company, Ziyi made a new request. He wanted her to teach him everything about hotel management. Under the guise of learning, his true intention was clear. He wanted to extend his time by her side for as long as possible, satisfying his second personality. At first, Jixia didn't think much of it, but as time passed, she began to feel suffocated. Z kept her so occupied with work that she barely had any time for herself. It wasn't long before exhaustion set in, but Bu Fan reassured her. He told her that Z was probably doing all of this simply because he loved her and wanted to stay close. Trusting Bu Fan's words, Jixia chose to believe in Ziyi's intentions. She pushed herself harder, taking on more work, to the point where she was staying up late at the office, completely absorbed in her responsibilities. Jixia dozed off from exhaustion, and when Z saw her, he instinctively decided to cover her with a blanket. Wanting to make her more comfortable, he placed a few books under her head as a pillow, but before he could move away, she unconsciously leaned against his arm. When he tried to pull away, she refused to let go even in her sleep, forcing him to stay beside her. As the night passed, Z found himself gazing at her, mesmerized by her beauty. At that moment, he finally understood why his second personality had fallen in love with her. Yet, deep down, he wished she could love him for who he was, not just the other side of him. By morning, Z woke up first and quietly left before Jixia could notice. When she finally opened her eyes, she vaguely recalled dreaming about him sleeping beside her. But when the secretary walked in carrying breakfast and mentioned that Z had sent it, reality set in. He had truly been there. A soft warmth filled her heart when she noticed the books he had placed under her head. Even though he had left her on the floor, that small gesture made her happy. However, her mood quickly shifted when the secretary informed her that Z was waiting outside, expecting her to drive him home. Annoyed, she muttered to herself, questioning whether he thought she was his personal chauffeur. But then, she remembered Bu Fan's words. Z must love her to the extent that he couldn't bear to be without her, even for a moment. Meanwhile, as Jixia stepped outside, Bu Fan unexpectedly ran into Aishin. To his shock, she laughed and admitted that she had actually recognized him from the start. She had never forgotten him. However, she had chosen not to say anything at the time because she was already engaged. Bu Fan's heart sank. He had spent so much time dwelling on the past, only to be met with disappointment. At the same time, Jixia was in the car with Ziyi, feeling conflicted and frustrated by the growing tension between them. But to her surprise, Ziyi was the one driving, not her. Instead of taking her home, he brought her to his house and asked her to step out of the car. Confused, Jixia followed him inside, wondering why he had taken her there. However, Her confusion quickly turned into shock when he led her to a billiard room and casually ordered her to clean it thoroughly. Humiliation washed over her. How could he claim to love her while treating her like a mere servant? Feeling both insulted and furious, Jixia suppressed her anger and did as he asked. Meanwhile, Ziyi left to meet with his uncle and an important investor to discuss a major business deal. However, throughout the meeting his mind kept drifting back to Jixia. Unable to concentrate, he abruptly left the discussion and returned to the billiard room with the investor. As soon as he saw Jixia, he ordered her to prepare tea for them. Her irritation grew tenfold. Frustrated, she reluctantly went to make the tea, but as she did, she overheard two employees discussing the significance of this deal for Z. A sudden idea struck her. If this deal was so important to him, why not sabotage it? That way, he would have no choice but to fire her, freeing her from his presence once and for all. With this in mind, she returned with the tea but deliberately stumbled, spilling it all over the investor. The investor erupted in anger, knocking over the teapot, which shattered into pieces. Before Jixia could react, Z immediately rushed to her side, his face filled with concern. Ignoring the deal altogether, he turned to the investor and said coldly, "You just injured one of my employees. That means we have no business together." Without waiting for a response, he grabbed Jixia's hand and led her out of the room. Jixia laughed, telling Z that she was perfectly fine and hadn't been hurt at all. She admitted that she had deliberately sabotaged the deal so he would fire her. But instead of getting angry, Z simply smirked and told her that she had actually done him a favor. He hadn't wanted to sign that deal with the investor anyway. "You need more training if you want to be a villain," he teased. "You're too cute for that." Then he walked away, leaving her frustrated. Determined not to give up, Jixia came up with a new plan. She would leave the country without telling anyone. However, just as she was about to depart, she found Z waiting for her in his car. He smirked at her and said, "You're in debt to me, and there's no way I'm letting you escape." Thinking quickly, she lied. "I wasn't going to leave. I was just going shopping. I brought my suitcase because I planned to buy a lot of things." Z didn't seem fully convinced, but he went along with it, following her to the stores. Determined to make him suffer, Jixia bought an excessive amount of clothes and accessories, making him pay for everything. Then, she dramatically sighed and said, "I'm so hungry." She dragged him to a restaurant and ordered a ridiculous amount of food, once again making him foot the bill. While they were eating, a man at a nearby table suddenly gasped for breath and collapsed. Panic surged through Jixia as she rushed to his side, her hands trembling. Tears welled up in her eyes as she tried to revive him, her heart pounding in terror. The man regains consciousness, and the ambulance arrives to take him. Z asks her if she knows this person, but she says no. However, she explains that her father had the same condition before he died, and the doctor told her that if someone at the hotel had revived him, he could have survived. Since then, she has suffered from panic attacks, struggling to breathe, and nothing has ever calmed her down except the music her lover, Lin, used to play for her. As she speaks, she suddenly experiences a panic attack. Z quickly takes her to the piano and decides to play the piece for her. She tells him that no one but Lin ever played that melody, which means he must be Lin, no matter how much he denies it. But Ziyi insists that his name is Ziyi, not Lin. She tells him she doesn't believe him. Seeing her like this, he moves closer to her, almost about to kiss her, when a child suddenly appears and asks him to play a specific piece, interrupting the moment. On their way home in the car, she tells him that no matter how much he insists his name is different, she is certain he is her lover, Lin. No one else knows that piece of music except him, no matter how much he denies it. When she gets home, she keeps imagining him everywhere. She decides that she will confront him tomorrow and won't leave until he explains why he abandoned her before. However, the next day, she wakes up to discover that the investor Ziyi refused to work with wants to meet her. He asks her to sell him the rest of her shares in the company and reveals that he is Ziyi's uncle. She asks why he is coming to her if he is Ziyi's uncle. He tells her that his relationship with Ziyi isn't great and that he knows she sold her shares to Ziyi. That's why he wants her to sell to him as well. Jixia is shocked when she realizes that the person who bought her shares in the first place was Ziyi. She is even more shocked when his uncle tells her that he plans to demolish the hotel as soon as he gains the majority stake in management. Jixia immediately goes to Ziyi and tells him she never knew he was such a despicable person, willing to destroy the hotel and erase all the years of hard work her father put into it. She says she now understands why he suddenly appeared in her life and then disappeared just as quickly. He was only trying to deceive her to get to the hotel from the start. But she won't let him do that. She storms off, leaving Z feeling hurt that she sees him in such a terrible light. He remembers how he spent time learning to play the music his other identity, Lin, used to play for her. Even though she insulted him, he finds a small sense of happiness knowing that he was able to save her from her panic attack. While Jixia is in the bathroom, she discovers that her uncle was forced to sell the rest of his shares to Ziyi. Now, Ziyi holds the highest stake in the hotel, meaning he can demolish it whenever he wants. Determined to stop him, Jixia comes up with a plan. She sends Ziyi a message saying, "Don't tear down the hotel because there's a huge treasure underneath it. If you want to know what it is, come to the basement." When Ziyi arrives, he finds Jixia coming up from the basement, wrapped in a blanket because there's no heating. At that moment, Bufan locks the door from the outside, trapping them inside. Jixia hands Ziyi a contract and tells him to sign it, agreeing to manage the hotel without ever selling it. Otherwise, she'll leave him there to freeze. Ziyi signs the contract, and Bufan unlocks the door. But just as Jixia thinks she's won, Ziyi surprises her by playing a recording of their conversation. He tells her that with this recording as proof that he signed under duress, the contract is invalid. Bufan quickly thinks on his feet and locks the door again, leaving Jixia and Ziyi trapped inside. Just then, Aishin arrives and Bufan spots her. He tries to stop her from finding out where Ziyi is. Meanwhile, inside the basement, a glass bottle falls and shatters on the floor. Ziyi quickly shields Jixia to prevent her from getting hurt, but he ends up getting injured instead. Jixia wraps his hand with his tie and then starts showing him the wine bottles. She explains how she has drawn the faces of everyone who has ever worked there and become part of the family on them. She tells him that when she considered selling her shares, she wanted to sell them to someone with more experience in the industry, someone who would preserve and expand her father's legacy, not destroy it. Then, she tells him that since he is now part of the place, he is also part of the family. To prove it, she draws his portrait on one of the bottles. Z is deeply moved. He recalls how his father despised him, treated him cruelly, and even regretted having him. Yet here was Jixia, so easily telling him that he was part of her family. He tells her that he will think about the hotel's future. However, once he steps out, Aishin tries to convince him that Jixia was just being sentimental. Ziyi coldly tells her that he wasn't convinced by Jixia's words anyway and instructs her to proceed with the hotel's demolition. As Aishin leaves the room, she makes a mysterious phone call to someone unknown, saying, "What you wanted is almost happening." Later that night, she returns home and falls asleep, only to be haunted by terrifying nightmares. In her dream, a figure relentlessly chases her, demanding that she either kill someone on his behalf or pay back the enormous debt she owes. The day Jixia finds out that Ziyi has officially started the demolition process, she completely loses control. Panicked, she rushes to her uncle, terrified upon learning that Ziyi has already begun tearing down the hotel's garden. However, when she arrives at the site, she is shocked to find environmental protection representatives there. They announce that it is illegal to cut down any trees or harm any plants in the garden, bringing the demolition to a halt. Ziyi is furious. He immediately assumes that his uncle is behind this and calls him. His uncle, instead of denying it, laughs and tells him how much he enjoys watching him fail. He even wishes that Ziyi's father were in China to witness just how much of a failure his son truly is. After ending the call, Aishin walks into the office. It is then revealed that she has been secretly working with Ziyi's uncle against him all along, feeding him every detail about Ziyi's actions and plans. The uncle smirks, saying he is very pleased with the unexpected intervention of the environmental protection representatives. Later that night, when Ziyi returns home, he notices a call has been made from his phone to one of the environmental protection officials. That's when he realizes his other personality, Lin, was the one who contacted them to protect the hotel. The next day, Ziyi visits his psychiatrist and tells him that Lin is starting to get out of control, making decisions that are beginning to harm him. The first was the attempt to end his own life, and now, Lin is interfering with his work. The doctor advises him to strictly stick to his medication for the time being. The following day, a famous idol arrives at the hotel. Jixia greets him warmly and escorts him to his room, but he rejects it immediately. He then refuses one room after another, finding fault with everything, until he sets his sights on Ziyi's suite. Left with no choice, Jixia goes to Ziyi and asks if he could temporarily give up his suite for a few days for the idol. To her surprise, Ziyi agrees without hesitation, saying, "Okay, let him have it." Shocked by how easily he gave it up, Jixia asks why. Ziyi simply replies that it's for the hotel's benefit. The idol is incredibly famous, and as the hotel manager, it's his responsibility to maintain its reputation. However, when the idol enters the suite, he once again begins complaining about every little thing. Eventually, he demands that Jixia personally clean the room to perfection, and that she wear a housekeeping uniform while doing it. When Z enters the suite and finds the idol lounging on the couch while Jixia is cleaning, he gets visibly annoyed. He immediately tells the idol that Jixia is not a housekeeper and shouldn't be doing this. But before he can say more, Jixia stops him. She reminds him that the customer is always right, and that since she agreed to clean, she will do it. Then she pointedly asks him why he's suddenly so upset. Wasn't he the one who made her clean before? Why is it bothering him now that the idol is the one making her do it? Z is irritated by her words and decides to leave the room. Later, the idol talks privately with his secretary, and it's revealed that he didn't come to the hotel just for leisure. His real reason for being there is that his older brother wants to marry Jixia's mother, and he strongly opposes the marriage. So, he came to the hotel with a plan to convince Jixia to help him sabotage the wedding. To gain her trust, he invites Jixia to lunch outside the hotel and gives her a special gift, knowing that this will spark rumors about them. If the media spreads gossip about his relationship with Jixia, it could create complications that might stop his brother from marrying her mother. Meanwhile, Z happens to be at the same restaurant and sees Jixia with the idol. He watches them together, and jealousy stirs within him. It turns out that Jixia deliberately agreed to go out with the idol after Bufan told her that Z was trying to keep her away from him. Most likely because Z was jealous. Wanting to provoke Z even more, she decided to play along. At the end of their outing, the idol hands her a luxury handbag as a gift, but she refused to accept it and preferred to pay for it herself. So, she exchanged WeChat contacts with him to transfer the payment. When Z saw this, he felt jealous. At that moment, the idol spilled water on Jixia, using it as an excuse to get close to her. The press captured the moment, and rumors quickly spread. However, Z immediately approached her, placed his jacket over her in front of everyone, and took her away. Jixia shouted at Ziyi, demanding to know what he was doing. He angrily asked why she accepted the bag from the other man when he could buy her something much better. Jixia was stunned by his reaction. Suddenly, the elevator doors opened, and Z stepped forward and kissed her forehead, only to realize, to their shock, that his father was there, watching. His father looked at him with disdain and said he couldn't believe Z had left an important investor meeting for something like this. He then called both of them to his office. Once there, he told Z that now he finally understood why he had refused to marry his friend's daughter. Then, with a sharp gaze, he added that he knew Ziyi was the one who had alerted the Environmental Protection Committee to put the hotel up for sale. His father scolded him, calling him a failure as always. He then ordered him to fix the situation with the investor, ensure that the hotel's profits went into their company's accounts rather than the hotel's, and finally, that he must return to the company immediately. Z tells him that he will do it in a week. Jixia asks Z what happened and if she caused him any trouble with the investor, but he assures her that it has nothing to do with her. She starts wondering whether Ziyi is really Lin or not, and if he still loves her. Otherwise, why did he come back to her again? Later, Ziyi goes to the idol and threatens him, saying that he has obtained old photos of him and will release them if he doesn't leave the hotel. He warns him that he will regret it if he refuses. After that, Ziyi returns to work and decides to apologize to the investor for leaving in the middle of the meeting. However, when his uncle finds out, he orders Aishin to stop Ziyi from doing so. Aishin pretends to have severe stomach pain and asks Z to take her to the hospital. However, Bufan arrives at that moment, so Z asks him to take her instead. After reaching the hospital with Bufan, Aishin feels guilty and sends a message to Jixia, telling her that the investor is important and asking her to help Z convince him. Later, Aishin asks Bufan to leave because her boyfriend is coming to pick her up. However, when he arrives, he gets a phone call, informing her that he has an emergency meeting and must leave. Bufan watches him in disbelief, sensing that he doesn't care about her at all. He then offers to drive her home instead. Meanwhile, Ziyi and Jixia are with the investor, who refuses to meet them all together. Left with no choice, they both leave and decide to take a walk along the beach. While there, they come across a girl standing by the shore, crying. She tells them that her toy has fallen into the water. Ziyi and Jixia realize that the girl is lost, so they take her to a nearby restaurant and enjoy a delicious meal together. Afterward, they head to the police station to help find her family. When the officer arrives, he recognizes them and reminds them that they've met before. He then jokingly asks if they already have a child. Jixia quickly responds that they aren't even a couple, let alone parents. A short while later, the girl's nanny arrives to take her back. They learn that her mother passed away some time ago, and the toy was the last thing she had left from her. Meanwhile, her father is a busy man who hardly has time for her. After returning home, Ziyi and Jixia try to modify a toy to make it look like the one in the picture they saw with the nanny. They agree to tell the girl that they found it. At that moment, Jixia feels just how kind and gentle Zi truly is. The next day, the two of them go to deliver the toy to the little girl, telling her that they had found it. The little girl is overjoyed to see her toy again. A few moments later, her father enters, and to their surprise, he turns out to be the same investor. He thanks them for taking care of his daughter and tells them that he will give them another chance. That day, the girl goes out with them again, and on the way back, Jixia asks Zi to drop her off at home as well. Then, she adds that she never knew he liked children so much. Zi replies that children aren't the only thing he likes, then looks directly into her eyes. Just then he receives a call from his doctor, informing him about a new treatment. The doctor explains that the treatment is risky. If it fails, Ziyi will disappear forever, and Lin will completely take over his body. Ziyi refuses the treatment, saying that Lin is happy now anyway while he himself is taking care of Jixia. The doctor then asks if he has fallen in love with Jixia, and Ziyi doesn't deny it. The next day, Ziyi asks Jixia to join him for lunch, but she refuses, telling him that she is only cooperating with him for work and nothing more. She adds that she can't go back to him after what he did to her that night. Ziyi leaves feeling completely frustrated, wondering how he can make Jixia fall in love with him again. His thoughts spiral to the point where he even imagines Lin telling him that Jixia loves only him. Desperate, Zi goes to the doctor and tells him that he feels like he's losing his mind. The doctor advises him that the solution is simple. He must confess his love to Jixia directly and interact with her as Zi, not Lin. He explains that Jixia still sees him as Lin and nothing more. When Zi returns to the company, he overhears Bufan talking to Jixia on the phone, telling her to choose her wedding dress carefully. Panic washes over Zi, and he rushes to the bridal shop. There, he finds Jixia struggling to tie the back of her dress, so he steps in and helps her. With frustration in his voice, he demands to know what's going on. Just then, a man steps out of the fitting room and explains that he is Jixia's mother's fiancé and that Jixia is only here to choose her mother's wedding dress. Zi quickly pretends that he ended up at the shop by coincidence, then casually tells her that he's busy and will be leaving. Meanwhile, Jixia recalls memories of Lin, specifically the time when she had planned to buy this very dress for her own wedding. Ziyi overhears her mumbling about it and, with firm resolve, tells her to forget the past and start anew with him because he loves her. He then confesses that he had an accident a year ago that left his memory blurred. But being near her has reignited his love, and despite everything, he wants to be with her. Jixia is overwhelmed with emotion and admits that she never truly got over him. At that moment, Zi steps closer and kisses her. Suddenly, Zi is struck by a severe headache. Alarmed, Jixia rushes to get him some water, but when she returns, he is nowhere to be found. She searches frantically until she finally finds him in another room, playing the piano. At that moment, it becomes clear. He is no longer Zi. He is Lin. Lin quickly pulls her into an embrace, telling her that he has missed her so much and hasn't seen her in a long time. Jixia is bewildered by his words, and her confusion deepens when the police officer they had encountered twice before coincidentally enters the room. However, when the officer addresses Lin, he simply looks at him blankly and claims that he doesn't know who he is. The officer then takes Jixia aside and tells her that he once witnessed Ziyi being involved in an accident. He is referring to the incident where he recently saved Ziyi a few days ago, but Jixia mistakenly believes he is talking about the accident Ziyi had told her about, the one that supposedly caused his memory loss. This convinces her that Ziyi truly has amnesia, which is why he no longer recognizes the officer. Meanwhile, in the adjacent room, Ziyi is fighting against Lin, struggling to regain control of his body. But Lin insists that Jixia belongs to him alone and that Ziyi cannot love her. Zi, however, argues back, declaring that he is the true owner of this body and that in the end he will win. In the midst of this internal battle, Ziyi suddenly finds himself inside Lin's memories. He recalls a moment from the past, Jixia at the doctor's office, being advised to listen to music to help her cope with her panic attacks. By chance, while she was at a record store, she overheard a beautiful melody playing from a nearby cinema hall. Drawn to the music, she hurried inside, only to discover that Lin was the one playing it. Lin takes control of Ziyi's mind once again and tells him that Jixia met him first, so he considers himself her true love, not Ziyi. He insists that he will never give her up. Jixia goes to Ziyi's house with him while Lin is still in control of the body. She places her fingerprint on the door lock, telling him that she will come by any time to check on him. After she leaves, the two argue again. Lin tells Yi that whoever manages to obtain the key to her house will win her love. Lin falls asleep, and when Z wakes up, he rushes to the doctor and asks what triggered Lin to emerge again. Z says he doesn't know, but the doctor suggests, maybe you miss your brother Lin. It is then revealed that Z once had a brother, but he insists that Lin's personality is completely different from his brother's. The doctor asks what he plans to do, and Z replies that he will go to war with Lin and prove that Jixia will fall in love with him, not Lin. The next day, Lin takes control of the body again and visits Jixia to get the key. However, he finds her feeling unwell, so he stays to take care of her. Jixia asks him to look after her cat, and he does. Then, he sits down and prepares a meal for her. Jixia is surprised by his excessive care and begins to think that his personality feels different from the one she was with before. He seems to have returned to how he was before the accident. As she gets closer to Lin to kiss him, he suddenly loses consciousness. The next day, Z wakes up to find the cat sleeping on his chest and screams, as he dislikes cats. This surprises Jixia, but then he notices a note left by Lin explaining what had happened the previous day. Jixia asks Z to prepare a meal for her, but she is shocked to find that he can't even chop vegetables. When she asks him what's wrong, he tells her that he is not obligated to cook for her and that he will simply order food instead. A little later, he calls the company employees for a meeting at her house. Seeing them together in that situation, all the employees realize they are in a relationship. After a while, Ziyi brings in a private chef to cook for her. When Aishin lets the chef in, Jixia asks her if Ziyi was the one who prepared the food. Aishin tells her that Ziyi has never even set foot in a kitchen before. This surprises Jixia so much that she starts to wonder if she had been hallucinating the previous day. After the meeting, Jixia goes to Ziyi, and he hands her a box containing important files she will need in case he is unavailable. When Z finds out that Lin kissed her the previous day, he feels jealous and kisses her as well. Then he asks her not to speak to him at all tomorrow because he has an appointment with the doctor and will not be in the best mood. The next day, when Jixia tries to avoid Ziyi as he requested, she unexpectedly runs into Lin. He is surprised by her behavior, and when she explains, he realizes what Ziyi has done and becomes furious. That evening, Ziyi speaks to Lin again and proposes a fair competition for Jixia's love. Each of them will spend one day with her in turns. However, this turns out to be a complete disaster for Jixia. She becomes extremely confused by how Ziyi's behavior changes every day, asking for different things and forgetting what they talked about the day before. She starts to feel like she's losing her mind and even wonders if he might be mentally unstable. Desperate for answers, she visits a psychologist who dismisses her concerns, insisting that she must be lying to herself and that she is simply in love with two men, so she needs to choose between them. As she leaves, she finds herself seriously wondering if she is actually dating two completely different people. Meanwhile, at the company, Lin is caught off guard when Aishin informs him that the investor who had given them a chance before is now here for a second meeting. Lin becomes nervous. He knows nothing about Ziyi's work and has no idea how to handle the situation. But just as things seem to spiral out of control, Jixia suddenly enters the room, holding the files Ziyi had given her. She confidently presents all the details of the partnership to the investor and speaks on Ziyi's behalf. She describes him as hardworking and brilliant, even though he may seem cold and harsh. Hearing her words, Lin immediately realizes she is talking about Ziyi, and a deep sense of jealousy burns inside him. After the meeting, they decide to attend the celebration organized by Ziyi's father. Aishin tells Lin that his father will be proud of him, so, for Ziyi's sake, Lin agrees to go to the event, leaving Jixia to return home alone. At the same time, Jixia begins to feel extremely dizzy due to low blood pressure and eventually loses consciousness. Meanwhile, at the party, Ziyi and Aishin are talking when she discovers Jixia's bracelet in Lin's pocket, realizing that it must have fallen from her. Ziyi immediately becomes worried. For the first time, he manages to take control of his real body while still awake. He runs toward Jixia, telling Lin that he will be the one to protect her now. Ziyi rushes back to the hotel and finds Jixia unconscious. He quickly calls an ambulance to take her to the hospital. There, Lin apologizes to Ziyi for leaving her alone just for the sake of the meeting, but Ziyi yells that Jixia is the most important thing in his life, more important than anything else. As he watches her, he tells himself that he must make a decision to protect Jixia, even if it means protecting her from himself. Meanwhile, Bufan is at a restaurant when he notices Aishin's boyfriend cheating on her. He takes pictures and goes to her immediately, but she asks him not to tell anyone and remains silent, showing no reaction. Later, she returns home feeling sad and tries to sleep but, as usual, suffers from insomnia. Suddenly, there is a knock on her door. She opens it to find Bufan standing there, telling her that he will stay with her for a while, even if they don't talk. The moment she sits beside him, she falls asleep on his shoulder. At that moment, Ziyi returns to the room, only to find that Jixia is not there. Lin appears once again and apologizes to Ziyi, saying he is truly sorry. However, Ziyi tells him that he is not capable of protecting Jixia. Just then, Jixia steps out of the bathroom and sees Ziyi talking to himself. But before she can question him, he quickly pulls her into a hug, telling her how worried he was and that he will never let her be harmed again. Later, Jixia sits with Bufan and confesses that she cannot understand Ziyi's behavior at all. There is something strange about him that she just can't figure out. Meanwhile, Ziyi meets with the doctor and tells him that he agrees to undergo the treatment they discussed before. The doctor asks, "Do you love Jixia that much? Enough to risk your life?" Ziyi responds that no matter which one of them survives, at the very least, he wants Jixia to have a good life. The next day, Bufan goes to check on Aishin again, only to find her boyfriend leaving her house. He storms upstairs, and when she opens the door, he scolds her for still holding on to that scumbag despite his betrayal. However, before she can respond, employees from their company suddenly step out. They had come to celebrate her birthday. Because of Bufan's outburst, everyone finds out she was cheated on. Feeling humiliated, Aishin watches as everyone awkwardly leaves. She then turns to Bufan, upset, and tells him that she had just broken up with her boyfriend and had convinced everyone that she was the one who ended things. She never wanted anyone to know he cheated on her. Overwhelmed with emotion, she begins to cry, but Bufan pulls her into a hug, telling her that her ex never deserved her in the first place. Meanwhile, Ziyi is deep in thought, trying to understand how he managed to break free and take control of his body. He suddenly remembers waking up on the floor and then recalls Jixia telling him that she had tried to kiss him the night before. Ziyi recalls how he managed to take control of his body when he was overwhelmed with fear for Jixia during the accident. This leads him to believe that whenever his emotions for her grow too strong, he can break free. And if this is happening to him, then it could also happen to Lin, meaning Lin could take over at any moment. Determined to prevent that, Ziyi decides to distance himself from Jixia until he completes his treatment. However, Jixia visits Ziyi's house, insisting on spending the day with him to make sure he is okay. She quickly notices that he is keeping his distance and even pushing her away. Just then, Ziyi's neighbor, a woman interested in him, arrives and starts flirting with him. Taking advantage of the distraction, Jixia sneaks into his room to look for anything unusual. She finds a note saying that Ziyi has an appointment with a psychiatrist the next day, which leaves her puzzled. When Ziyi returns, Jixia questions him about the neighbor and what she wants from him. She then moves closer and asks him to sit with her on the bed. Ziyi tenses up, but she surprises him by simply wanting to play cards. She hands him the Joker card and tells him that as long as he holds onto it, she will forgive him for anything, except betrayal. Afterward, she asks him to return the neighbor's belongings and to never interact with her again. While he is out, Jixia searches for the psychiatrist's name, determined to find him. When Ziyi returns, Jixia suggests they spend the day together, but Ziyi refuses and keeps avoiding her. She realizes that he is deliberately distancing himself, but he ultimately fails to resist her and ends up kissing her. When he notices that Lin does not emerge, he decides to spend the night with her. The next morning, Jixia wakes up to find a note from Ziyi saying he is going on a business trip. However, she immediately senses that he is lying and that he is actually going to see the psychiatrist. Without hesitation, she takes Bufan with her and heads to the clinic. Once there, Bufan distracts the doctor while Jixia sneaks into his office. She searches through Ziyi's medical records and finally uncovers everything he has been hiding from her. The doctor enters the room, but Jixia quickly escapes before bumping into Ziyi. They stand there, staring at each other in silence. Without a word, Ziyi takes her to his room and finally starts telling her everything from the beginning. He confesses that he has suffered from this disorder since he was 20 and that the person she met at the start was actually Lin, not him. However, despite everything, he has now fallen in love with her for real. Jixia, overwhelmed with emotions, begins to cry. She tells him that he deceived her and that she cannot believe the first person she met was Lin, not him. She recalls how cruel he was to her, even going so far as to abandon her in the hotel that night, leaving her only money before disappearing. Ziyi takes out the Joker card and reminds her that she promised to forgive him as long as he kept it. But Jixia shakes her head, saying that things are not that simple. She cannot forgive him because he lied to her. Then she asks whether it was him or Lin who saved her when the hotel collapsed. When Ziyi admits that it was Lin, Jixia feels utterly broken. She tells him that she never wants to see him again. Z, just as shattered, tells her that he always knew she would choose Lin over him. At that moment, Jixia remembers hearing Z talking to himself before, saying, "We'll see who she chooses between us." Z turns to leave, but Jixia, feeling an unbearable ache in her heart, follows him. As she runs after him, memories of everything they shared flash through her mind, how he took care of her, how he brought her a private chef just to make sure she ate, all the small moments of kindness he showed her. But when she finally reaches him, Z stops her with cold eyes and says, "If you won't be with me, I won't let you be with Lin either, while using my body." Z leaves, and a whole month passes while he remains in the hospital, refusing to see her. When his psychiatrist speaks to him, Z explains that he is undergoing treatment to free his body from Lin, to reclaim it as his own and no one else's. He does not want to hear Jixia's name. After Zi is discharged from the hospital, Jixia is working diligently at the hotel, while Bufan tries to lift her spirits. Around this time, a young woman named Yo-Yo appears. She is the daughter of a well-known investor. She asks her father to arrange her marriage to Zi because she loves him. Her father agrees and begins a business partnership with Zi. When Yo-Yo meets Zi, she expresses her admiration for him and her eagerness to work with him, but Zi makes it clear that he does not mix business with personal relationships. When Jixia's uncle informs her about this, she replies that she does not care. The next day, Yo-Yo meets Zi again and proposes that they pretend to be in a relationship in front of the media, as it would boost their company's stock value. Zi agrees, but only to provoke Jixia's jealousy for leaving him. He publicly announces to the press that he is dating Yo-Yo but warns her not to overstep her boundaries, as he does not love her. Later, when Yo-Yo visits his home and picks up one of Jixia's belongings, Zi snatches it away from her, telling her to stay away from Jixia's things before kicking her out. At that moment, Yo-Yo realizes that Zi has not moved on from Jixia. At the same time, Bufan goes to meet Aishin, only to find her ex-boyfriend there, trying to win her back. Without hesitation, Bufan quickly pushes him away and takes out a wedding ring, asking her to be his. Aishin tells him she accepts. When she returns home, Bufan kisses her and expresses how happy he is. However, she suddenly receives a call from Zi's uncle and her expression darkens. She takes off the ring, asks Bufan to forget about her completely, and forces him to leave. But Bufan is certain she does not mean it from her heart and suspects the call has something to do with it. Meanwhile, Yo-Yo takes Zi to choose a wedding dress in front of the press to make their engagement appear real. While browsing, Zi notices the dress Jixia once admired and decides to buy it just to ensure no one else gets it. At that moment, Jixia is also in the store, helping a hotel client pick a dress. When she sees Zi and Yo-Yo together, she stares at him blankly before calmly wishing him a happy marriage as if she feels no jealousy at all. This only fuels Zi's anger. Her indifference infuriates him. He then grabs Yo-Yo's hand, and she smirks, saying, "Listen, we'll be holding our wedding at your hotel." Zi is taken aback, but he is even more shocked when Jixia responds with a composed smile, saying she would be delighted to host them, before walking away. The next day, Yo-Yo visits Jixia, sensing that Zi still has feelings for her. She tells Jixia that not only will they have their wedding at her hotel, but Jixia will also be responsible for organizing the event and selecting their wedding rings. Despite her heartbreak, Jixia agrees, stating that as long as it benefits the hotel, she has no problem with it. Yo-Yo informs Zi about Jixia agreeing to plan their wedding, and he feels a deep sadness. Jixia has moved on so much that she's willing to organize the event herself. However, he reminds Yo-Yo not to forget that this wedding is fake, merely a business strategy to boost their stock value. On the wedding day, Jixia is visibly tense and sorrowful. Midway through the event, the power suddenly goes out. Zi immediately remembers how Jixia once told him that she suffers from panic attacks in the dark. Without hesitation, he grabs her hand and rushes her outside, leaving the guests bewildered. From behind the stage, Bufan steps forward and announces to everyone that the wedding is nothing but a fabricated event for business purposes. The revelation causes an immediate scandal. Meanwhile, Jixia pulls away from Zi, who insists that he was only worried about her. But she tells him their relationship ended because he lied to her, and she will never return to him. Refusing to give up, Zi starts following her everywhere, trying to express his feelings, but she avoids him every time, haunted by the memories of his betrayal. The next day, she stumbles with the famous idol again, who now is officially the brother of her mom's husband. She takes him to meet Zi and pretends they are now a couple. However, Zi immediately finds the idol's behavior suspicious and overly exaggerated. He starts mocking them, unable to believe Jixia's act. but she coldly tells him to forget about her entirely because she will never return to him. As Z leaves, the idol turns to Jixia and asks, "Z clearly loves you. Why are you treating him so harshly?" She replies, "Love isn't everything. He lied to me while we were together." Later that night, Jixia goes out drinking and ends up completely intoxicated. Ziyi, who had been secretly following her, watches from a distance. Just as she is about to collapse, he quickly catches her. The moment she finds herself in his arms, she mumbles, "I love you," before losing consciousness. Z carried Jixia home, and without warning, she kissed him, confessing that she had never forgotten him. Just as joy began to fill his heart, his eyes fell on her bag, where he found a photo of her with Lin. In that moment, he realized that no matter what he did, Jixia would always love the illusion he had created, not him. A wave of sorrow and despair consumed Yi so intensely that it allowed Lin to resurface once again. Lin rushed to Jixia, who opened the door only to freeze in shock when he told her, "I'm Lin, not Z." At first, she refused to believe him, but when he recounted memories of their time together, she had no choice but to accept the truth. Lin stepped inside and casually started preparing food, brushing off the problems between Ziyi and Jixia, claiming they had nothing to do with him. However, for the first time, Jixia felt uneasy in his presence. He suddenly seemed like a stranger to her. The next day, Jixia attended her mother's wedding with Lin by her side. While he played the piano, Jixia found herself envisioning Ziyi in his place, as if he were the one sitting before her. After the ceremony, Lin confessed his deep love for her, but Jixia told him that whether it was him or Ziyi, she could never go back. She explained that he had countless chances to tell her the truth, that he was just a persona created by Ziyi's mind, but he never did. That alone made both him and Z equally untrustworthy. She firmly asked him to leave her life, both of them. Lin returned home, heartbroken. For the first time, both he and Z fully understood each other's pain. In their shared sorrow, they found comfort in one another. Meanwhile, Jixia was with her mother, pretending to be fine, but in reality, she was crying and venting about everything happening. She confessed that Ziyi and Lin's actions were driving her insane and that she wanted to escape, but having him in the same hotel made it impossible. Her mother reassured her, promising to help her out of this situation. She immediately called her manager and ordered him to withdraw all her money from the bank. The next day, Jixia woke up hungover and discovered what her mother had done. Though she regretted it, she still handed Jixia the money before leaving for her honeymoon. Jixia later told the idol that her relationship with Ziyi was truly over and that she needed to accept it. At the same time, Ziyi's father and Yo-Yo's father sat together, each blaming the other for the scandal. Yo-Yo's father demanded an apology, but before anything could escalate, Jixia stormed into the room. She handed Ziyi's father the money and announced that she wanted to buy Ziyi's shares in the company. As she turned to leave, Ziyi's father coldly told her to stay away from his son entirely. Just then, Ziyi walked in. He saw the money and overheard his father's words. Without hesitation, he grabbed the cash and threw it into the bathtub, glaring at his father. "You will never be able to buy Jixia with money. And she would never leave me for money," he shouted. But Jixia's voice cut through the tension. "This is my money. I took it to buy your shares." Z immediately jumped into the tub to retrieve the soaked bills, only for Jixia to lose her balance and fall in after him. Both Z and Jixia frantically tried to dry the soaked money. As Z moved closer to help dry her hair, Jixia felt her heart waver. She still had feelings for him despite her fear of stepping back into a life with him. Later, she went to speak with his father about purchasing the shares but quickly noticed signs of early Alzheimer's in him. Concerned, she left and immediately informed Z about his father's condition. When Z entered the room, he found his father unconscious. Panic set in as they rushed to call a doctor. After receiving treatment, his father weakly admitted to Jixia that his illness was due to the stress caused by Z. Stepping outside, Jixia confronted Z. "No matter what issues you have with him, you need to take better care of your father." Understanding her words, Z took her to a room where he had prepared a photo album filled with pictures of his father and his friends. He hoped it would help his father remember happier times. But Jixia felt it wasn't enough. Determined, she started creating a new album. This time, instead of just pictures, she added captions beneath each one, describing the events in Ziyi's father's life just as Ziyi had told them to her. When Ziyi handed the completed album to his father, the old man's face lit up with joy. The effect became even more evident when an old friend came to visit. Ziyi's father was able to converse with him without forgetting details, something he hadn't been able to do in a long time. Feeling grateful, he made a decision. He visited Yo-Yo's father and firmly declared, My son will not marry Yo-Yo just for the sake of company shares. But if you still wish to collaborate with us as business partners, I'd be more than happy to discuss it. Ziyi's father then went to his son and told him, from now on, you are free to do whatever you wish. Jixia is an amazing woman, and if you want to sell the hotel shares to her, go ahead. He also sincerely apologized for any pain he had caused him in the past. Taking the contract, Ziyi went straight to Jixia and told her he had accepted her offer. The hotel was now officially hers. I'll do anything to make you happy, he added before inviting her to dinner. Later, Ziyi visited a grave, Lin's grave. It was revealed that Lin wasn't his brother, but his cousin, whom he had always treated as a sibling. Standing before the tombstone, Ziyi murmured, I miss you so much, but I'm doing fine now. At that moment, Ziyi's uncle arrived. His voice was filled with anger as he demanded, what are you doing here? Why are you visiting my son's grave? You're the reason he died. Ziyi returned home that night, haunted by nightmares of his cousin's death. In his dreams, voices echoed around him, accusing him of being responsible. The weight of his guilt was overwhelming, and when he finally woke up, he wasn't himself anymore. Lin had taken over. Realizing what had happened, Lin tried to reach Ziyi, calling out to him from within, but there was no response. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't break through. Desperate, Lin went to see Jixia. I'm not Ziyi, he told her. I'm Lin, and I can't even talk to him anymore. He doesn't want to come back. Jixia, seeing the distress in his eyes, asked, then tell me, why did Ziyi develop this disorder in the first place? But Lin refused. Ziyi wouldn't want me to share his secrets. Determined to find the truth, Jixia made a bold move. She kidnapped Ziyi's psychiatrist. Holding him hostage, she threatened him, saying, if you don't tell me exactly what happened to Ziyi to make him this way, I won't let you go. Faced with no other option, the doctor revealed the truth. When Ziyi was a child, Lin was kidnapped by his father's rivals, who mistook him for Ziyi, hoping to use him as leverage. Though Lin managed to escape, he got into an accident and died. Since that day, Ziyi's uncle had blamed him for Lin's death. Ziyi, who had always seen Lin as a brother, couldn't bear the guilt. To cope, his mind created an alternate personality, and ever since then, he had been trapped in this endless battle within himself. Hearing the story, Jixia felt a deep sadness for Ziyi. At this time, Lin is struggling because Ziyi refuses to go out, even though there's an important deal that must be completed. Ziyi is unable to handle the situation, and no matter how much Lin tries to talk to him and get him to come out, he fails to communicate with him. Meanwhile, Yo-Yo goes to Ziyi's uncle and tells him she wants revenge on Ziyi for leaving her. She decides to cooperate with him. The next day, Yo-Yo goes to the company and claims that Ziyi's actions have harmed her father's company. She demands compensation instead of filing a lawsuit against him. However, Lin and Jixia refuse to give in. Lin tells Yo-Yo that he will pay the compensation but asks for time until the next day. Later, Lin and Jixia sit together, trying to find a way to counter Yo-Yo. But Jixia struggles to open the top file, no matter how much she tries. At that moment, Ziyi's uncle calls, and Lin answers. The uncle firmly tells him that he will never do what Lin wants and will not surrender to Yo-Yo. Just then, Jixia guesses that the password might be Lin's name, and she turns out to be right. Lin manages to find a recording of Yo-Yo admitting that the wedding was a lie. He then impersonates Ziyi and threatens Yo-Yo, warning her that he will expose her if she doesn't leave him alone. His plan works. Aishin had been closely observing the situation. Although she was proud of what Ziyi did, she still informed his uncle about it, telling him how Ziyi had kicked Yo-Yo out of the company. Aishin returns home, torn between happiness for Ziyi and loyalty to his uncle, who once did her a favor she could never forget. Suddenly, there's a knock on the door, and Bufan enters. He is still trying to win her love. During their conversation, Aishin learns from him that Ziyi has been seeing a therapist. She then sends a man to sneak into the company and investigate Ji. However, at that moment, Jixia is still in the company. When she sees the intruder, she hides. She quickly calls security to come up, but the man hears her. Just as he is about to attack her, Lin appears and saves her. Jixia hugged Lin in fear but quickly pulled away when she remembered that he was Lin, not Ziyi. Seeing this, Lin visits the psychiatrist the next day, asking how they can bring Ziyi back. The doctor is surprised by Lin's boldness and his desire to restore Ziyi, despite how unnatural it is. He warns Lin that if Ziyi doesn't return, there will be severe consequences. The only way to bring Ziyi back is for Lin to want to leave so badly that it forces Ziyi to return. Later, the psychiatrist meets with Jixia and asks her to convince Lin to leave because his presence poses a danger to Ziyi. The body can only accept one of them, and ultimately, Ziyi is the original owner. What they don't realize is that Lin is secretly listening. He finally understands that Jixia truly loves Zi, not him. Meanwhile, Aishin hands Ziyi's uncle all the details of his psychological condition, unaware that Bufan is secretly watching them. Aishin asks Ziyi's uncle to let her resign, but he refuses. He reminds her of his kindness, how he paid for her education, and that without him, she wouldn't be where she is now. He insists that she must continue what she's doing. At that moment, Bufan realizes that she is the spy. Bufan tells her that when he first fell in love with her, she was gentle, kind, and compassionate. He warns her that she should hold on to that version of herself and not lose herself in what she is doing. At that time, the uncle went to Ziyi's father with the reports and told him that if this report leaked to the board of directors, Ziyi would be completely removed from his position because he was unqualified for it. Ziyi's father, who seemed to already be aware of the matter, pleaded with his brother not to do this, reminding him that they were family in the end. However, his brother told him that his son, Lin, had died because of Ziyi, and that was something he would never forgive them for as long as he lived. Ziyi's father collapsed from a heart attack, and when he reached for his medication, his brother threw it into the swimming pool before leaving. Ziyi's father was rushed to the hospital, and there, Lin went to check on him, feeling sorrowful. Lin then went to Jixia and told her that he would be leaving forever and that he was happy for her and Zi. Jixia felt sorry for him, knowing he would leave without ever becoming a famous musician. She took him to the theater and asked him to play for her. Just for today, she would be his only audience. At that time, Aishin visited Ziyi's father and gave him a gift, thanking him for everything he had done for her. However, she told him that she would be leaving China and would no longer continue what she had been doing. Meanwhile, the uncle returned to the hotel, where he heard the sound of music. He entered the theater and found Lin playing the first piece that his son, Lin, had ever composed. In that moment, he realized that the mysterious figure Lin was actually his deceased son. Later, Lin took Jixia home and told her that the next day, she would find that Zi had awakened. But before he could leave, Uncle Zi arrived and told Lin that he would help him leave China and live as Lin forever, where no one would recognize him. Though his uncle's true intention was to get rid of him and kill him, Lin suddenly recalled how he had found his uncle's shirt button in his father's hand. That was when he realized that his uncle was the one orchestrating everything. Lin rushed home and tried to contact Ziyi, warning him that their uncle had attempted to kill his father and was planning to take over the company. He also told him that Jixia would inevitably be in danger. Zi finally woke up and regained control of his body, but he refused to reveal himself as Zi. Instead, he chose to remain as Lin in order to trap his uncle. When Jixia met him and asked whether he was Ziyi or Lin, he told her he was Lin and that he couldn't bring Ziyi back. Disappointment appeared on Jixia's face, and he noticed it clearly. She reminded him that he had promised to bring Ziyi back. He told her he would try again and just needed more time. Sighing, Jixia went to make some tea, but she accidentally burned her hand. When Ziyi rushed to help her, she pulled away and told him she was leaving. This made Ziyi happy, as he realized she didn't love Lin. However, a while later, Jixia had to return because she had forgotten her phone. When she charged it at home, she discovered a recorded video of Lin and his uncle. In the video, Lin was making a deal with his uncle to remain in Ziyi's body forever in exchange for giving his uncle all of the company's shares while keeping his secret safe. Jixia was shocked, but before she could react, she sensed something behind her. She turned to find Ziyi, who told her that this was the only way he could protect her. He then tied her up and locked her in a room. When he later brought her food, Jixia firmly told him that she would never let him take over Ziyi's body, that she loved Ziyi, not him, and that no matter what he did, she would never love him. Ziyi recorded her words and left the room quickly, his heart pounding violently. At last, he realized that Jixia truly loved him, not Lin, and he felt an overwhelming happiness. However, he forced himself not to confess the truth to her. After that, Ziyi went to meet his uncle and finalized their agreement. The uncle went to the company and informed the board members that Ziyi was ill and, unfortunately, he would have to take over running the company until Ziyi fully recovered. However, at that moment, Ziyi arrived, his true self, and told everyone that his uncle was a liar and a fraud. He then presented recordings he had obtained through the gift watch that Aishin had given his uncle. This watch had allowed him to record all of his uncle's confessions during every meeting they had. The police arrived to arrest the uncle, but he managed to escape. Meanwhile, in the locked room, Jixia noticed that the food Lin had prepared was burnt. She suddenly realized that this was actually Ziyi, not Lin, since Ziyi didn't know how to cook. When she stepped into the kitchen, she found it in complete chaos. confirming her suspicion. It was indeed Z. Just then, Bufan arrived, untied her, and told her that Z was the one who had sent him. Jixia immediately rushed to the company, desperate to find Z. As soon as she got out of the car and saw him, she was about to run toward him when the uncle suddenly appeared, attempting to kill her by ramming into her with his car. But Z moved quickly toward her, taking the hit instead. In that moment, we saw Z within his subconscious mind, watching the scene unfold. It became clear that Lin had taken over the body at the last second, to protect Jixia. In a flashback, we see that Lin and Z had indeed been kidnapped together by the gang. Both of them managed to escape, but just before they could, Lin was hit by a car right in front of Ziyi's eyes. Finally, Lin spoke to Ziyi, telling him that when he had been created in Ziyi's mind as a child, his only purpose was to stay with him, protect him, and keep him from being alone. But now, Ziyi was no longer alone. He had Jixia. It was time for Lin to leave. He asked Ziyi to take good care of Jixia and not to forget to visit his grave with her. A moment later, Ziyi finally opened his eyes and saw Jixia crying. He reassured her that he was okay. Ziyi's uncle was finally arrested, and at the hospital, the doctor assured them that Ziyi's father was in stable condition. Aishin arrived as well, apologizing to Ziyi for everything she had done in the past. She told him that she would resign and leave China. But before she could, Bufan stopped her, telling her that he wouldn't let her leave alone, that he truly loved her. At last, she agreed to date him, and they left together. Later, Ziyi invited Jixia to dinner. While they were there, Jixia overheard that a man was going to propose to his girlfriend that night. She felt a surge of excitement, thinking it was Ziyi's plan. However, when Ziyi arrived, he seemed unaware of any proposal and talked about ordinary things, leaving Jixia disappointed. Ziyi noticed her expression and asked if she had been expecting something from him. She denied it, but deep inside, her hope faded as she watched another man propose to his girlfriend. But then, to her surprise, she realized it had all been part of Ziyi's plan. He pulled out a ring and proposed to her in front of everyone. Overjoyed, Jixia accepted. The series ended with Ziyi and Jixia's wedding, surrounded by all the people who loved them, both of them radiating happiness as they embarked on their new life together.